I left work early without telling anyone because it was over 130-degree relief in the greenhouse. Then my supervisor threatened to suspend me. So I gathered evidence and went straight to HR. What happened next completely destroyed her authority and saved my entire career. I'm Felix Blackwood. I'm 18 years old. And this is the story of how one blazing hot day taught me that sometimes you have to risk everything to protect yourself from a toxic boss who doesn't care if you live or die. When I first received that acceptance letter from Pinnacle Agricultural Sciences 6 months ago, I thought I'd won the lottery. This wasn't just any summer job. This was a prestigious internship at one of the most influential agricultural research companies in the entire Midwest. They had direct contracts with the federal government. Their research was being used to revolutionize farming across America, and getting this position meant I was fast-tracking toward my dream career in agricultural biotechnology. I remember driving up to the facility for my first day, my hands gripping the steering wheel as I stared at the impressive complex spread out before me. Dozens of pristine glass greenhouses dotted the landscape like crystal cathedrals, each one housing different experimental crops and cutting-edge growing systems. The main administrative building was this sleek, modern structure that screamed success and innovation. Walking through those doors felt like stepping into my future. My direct supervisor was a man named Marcus Bellwether, and from day one, I could tell he was someone special. Marcus had been with the company for over 15 years, working his way up from an entry-level researcher to head of greenhouse operations. He was in his early 40s, with graying temples and the kind of calm confidence that comes from knowing your field inside and out. "Felix," he said during our first meeting, his voice warm but professional, "I'm going to be straight with you. This internship isn't going to be easy. We're going to push you, challenge you, and expect you to perform at a level that most college graduates struggle with. But if you can handle it, if you can prove yourself here, doors will open for you that most people can only dream of." I nodded eagerly, hanging on every word. Marcus had this way of speaking that made you feel like you were part of something important, something bigger than yourself. "The work we do here," he continued, gesturing toward the windows that overlooked the greenhouse complex, "it's not just about growing plants. We're developing drought-resistant crops that could feed millions of people. We're creating sustainable growing methods that could revolutionize how America approaches agriculture. Every day you spend here, every task you complete, you're contributing to research that could change the world." Those first few weeks under Marcus's guidance were incredible. He taught me everything from soil composition analysis to advanced hydroponic systems. He showed me how to monitor plant health using sophisticated computer programs, how to collect data that would contribute to multi-million-dollar research projects, and how to maintain 6 different greenhouse environments simultaneously. "The key," Marcus would say as we walked between the greenhouses, "is understanding that each environment tells a story. The temperature, the humidity, the soil moisture, they're all characters in that story. Your job is to listen to what they're telling you and respond accordingly." Marcus treated me like a colleague rather than just an intern. He'd ask for my opinions on experimental procedures, involve me in meetings with senior researchers, and even let me contribute to the weekly reports that went directly to the government liaisons. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. "You have real potential, Felix," Marcus told me during my 6-week evaluation. "I've recommended you for early consideration for our full-time junior researcher program. If you keep this up, you could be working here permanently before you even finish college." I went home that night feeling like I was walking on air. Everything I'd worked for, everything I'd dreamed of, was finally within reach. But then, everything changed when Marcus announced he was taking his first vacation in 3 years. "I'll only be gone for 2 weeks, he assured me during our final briefing. "While I'm away, you'll be reporting directly to Wilhelmina Blackthorne. She's the regional operations manager, and technically my superior, though she works out of the main office in Des Moines." I'd heard Wilhelmina's name mentioned in passing, always with a certain tone that I couldn't quite place. She was known for being incredibly demanding and having zero tolerance for what she considered inefficiency or excuses. "Just remember everything I've taught you," Marcus said, placing a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "Stick to the protocols, document everything, and you'll be fine. Wilhelmina can be intense, but she's brilliant at what she does. The first sign of trouble came on Marcus's second day of vacation. I was working in Greenhouse Complex C, monitoring the experimental corn varieties, when my phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "This is Wilhelmina Blackthorn. I'll be monitoring your work remotely through our security camera system. Maintain all protocols and report any irregularities immediately." I stared at the message, feeling a chill run down my spine despite the warm greenhouse air. Something about the tone felt cold, impersonal, almost threatening. But I pushed the feeling aside and focused on my work. For the next few days, everything proceeded normally. I maintained the 6 greenhouse environments under my care, collected the required data samples, and submitted my daily reports exactly as Marcus had taught me. Occasionally, I'd catch a glimpse of the security cameras positioned throughout the complex and wonder if Wilhelmina was watching me at that exact moment. Then came the day that changed everything. I woke up that Tuesday morning to my phone buzzing with weather alerts. The National Weather Service was forecasting temperatures reaching 105 degrees Fahrenheit, with heat indices approaching 110. It was going to be one of the hottest days of the summer, and I was already dreading the thought of working in the greenhouses. But I'd handled hot days before. The greenhouses were designed with climate control systems, and while they could get warm, they were generally manageable even during heat waves. What I didn't anticipate was that the main cooling system for Complex C would choose that exact day to malfunction. I arrived at work at 7 a.m. as usual, going through my morning routine of checking each greenhouse environment and recording the baseline measurements. Everything seemed normal until I stepped into Greenhouse 6. The moment I opened that door, I was hit with a wall of heat so intense it literally took my breath away. The digital thermometer mounted on the wall read 128 degrees Fahrenheit, and it was still climbing. The automated ventilation system was completely silent, and the emergency cooling fans weren't running. I immediately called the maintenance hotline, but got a recorded message saying that due to the extreme weather, they were experiencing higher than normal call volumes and delays were expected. I tried opening the manual ventilation panels, but with the outside temperature already approaching 100 degrees, it barely made a difference. Standing in that greenhouse felt like being trapped inside an oven. The air was so thick and superheated that each breath felt like it was burning my lungs. Sweat was pouring off me within minutes, and I could feel my heart racing as my body struggled to cope with the extreme heat. But I had a job to do. 6 greenhouse environments depended on my monitoring and care, and Marcus had trusted me to maintain his protocols no matter what. So I pushed through the discomfort and tried to focus on my tasks. For the first few hours, I managed to work in intervals. I'd spend 10 minutes in Greenhouse 6 collecting data and checking on the experimental crops, then retreat to one of the cooler greenhouses to recover. But as the outside temperature continued to climb, even the supposedly climate-controlled environments were heating up beyond comfortable levels. By noon, the thermometer in Greenhouse 6 was reading 132 degrees. The heat was so intense that the metal tools were too hot to touch with bare hands, and the air itself seemed to shimmer like a mirage. I was going through bottles of water faster than I could drink them, and despite my best efforts to stay hydrated, I was starting to feel the early symptoms of heat exhaustion. My head was pounding, my vision was getting blurry around the edges, and I was experiencing waves of nausea that left me doubled over. But every time I thought about calling for help or leaving early, I remembered Marcus's words about maintaining protocols and Wilhelmina's reputation for having zero tolerance for excuses. Just push through it, I kept telling myself. You can handle this. You're tougher than you think. But by 2 p.m., I knew I was in real trouble. I'd been working in that hellish environment for 7 hours straight, and my body was starting to shut down. When I tried to stand up after checking a soil moisture reading, the world spun violently around me, and I had to grab onto a support beam to keep from collapsing. That's when I looked at the thermometer one more time and saw that it had reached 134 degrees Fahrenheit. I remembered Marcus mentioning during training that our employment contracts specifically prohibited working in environments exceeding 115 degrees. I was nearly 20 degrees beyond the safety threshold, and I was literally risking my health to maintain these protocols. I pulled out my phone and took a picture of the thermometer, my hands shaking as I tried to focus the camera. The image showed 134 degrees in stark digital numbers, with the greenhouse environment clearly visible in the background. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. I couldn't continue working in these conditions without risking serious injury or worse. Marcus would understand. Any reasonable person would understand. I gathered my equipment, secured the greenhouse environments as best I could, and headed for my car. The drive home was a blur of air conditioning and shaking hands. I felt guilty for leaving early, but I also felt relief at finally being in a safe environment where I could think clearly and let my body recover from the extreme heat exposure. I'd been home for maybe 30 minutes, sitting in my kitchen with a cold drink and a wet towel around my neck, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but something told me I needed to answer. Felix Blackwood? The voice on the other end was sharp, clipped, and absolutely furious. Yes, this is Felix. This is Wilhelmina Blackthorne. I've been monitoring our security cameras, and I noticed you left the facility at 2:30 p.m. Your shift doesn't end until 5 p.m. Care to explain why you abandoned your post? The word abandoned hit me like a slap. I'd never thought of it that way, but I could hear the accusation in her voice. Miss Blackthorne, I can explain. The cooling system in Greenhouse 6 malfunctioned, and the temperature reached over 130 degrees. I was starting to experience heat exhaustion symptoms, and I felt it was unsafe to continue working. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Wilhelmina spoke again, her voice was ice cold. So you're telling me that you left your assigned duties because it was a little warm? A little warm? I couldn't keep the incredulity out of my voice. Ma'am, the temperature was 134 degrees. That's nearly 20 degrees above our contractual safety limit. I have photographic evidence if you need proof. I don't need your evidence, Mr. Blackwood. What I need is an intern who can handle the basic responsibilities of his position without making excuses. My own intern here in Des Moines is managing her greenhouse duties just fine, and she hasn't complained once about the heat. I felt my temper starting to flare. Of course, her intern in Des Moines was fine. She was probably working in a single, properly climate-controlled greenhouse, not managing 6 different environments with a broken cooling system. With all due respect, Miss Blackthorne, I don't think your intern is dealing with the same conditions I was facing. The equipment failure created a genuinely dangerous situation. A dangerous situation? Her voice dripped with condescension. Mr. Blackwood, if you can't handle a little discomfort, perhaps this internship isn't the right fit for you. Now, I need you to return to the facility immediately and complete your assigned duties. I looked at the clock on my kitchen wall. It was already 3:15 p.m., and the facility was a 30-minute drive away. Even if I left immediately, I'd arrive at nearly 4 p.m., and company policy prohibited interns from working past 5 p.m. Ms. Blackthorne, even if I left right now, I'd only have about an hour before I'd have to leave again. And honestly, if the cooling system still isn't fixed, I don't think it's safe for me to work in those conditions. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. When Wilhelmina finally spoke, her voice was like a blade. Let me make something very clear to you, Mr. Blackwood. If you do not return to that facility immediately, I will suspend you for 1 week without pay and file a formal disciplinary report that will become part of your permanent employment record. This is not a negotiation. I felt something shift inside me. The fear, the desperation to please, the need to maintain this internship at all costs. It all crystallized into something else. Anger. Pure, righteous anger at being threatened for prioritizing my own safety. Ms. Blackthorne, I said, my voice steady despite the rage building inside me. If you think those working conditions are acceptable, I invite you to drive down here and spend 6 hours in a 134-degree greenhouse yourself. See how long you last before you start making excuses. I could practically feel her fury through the phone. How dare you speak to me that way? You're nothing but an intern, and apparently not a very good one. When Marcus returns from his vacation, he's going to hear exactly how unprofessional and unreliable you've proven to be. That's when something inside me snapped completely. You know what? You're absolutely right about one thing. I shouldn't have left without notifying someone. That was wrong, and I apologize for that. But I will not apologize for refusing to risk my health and safety. Because you're too busy sitting in your air-conditioned office to understand what's actually happening in the field. You are making a huge mistake, Mr. Blackwood. Maybe I am, but I'd rather make a mistake than end up in the hospital with heat stroke, because I was too afraid to stand up for myself. And with that, I hung up. I sat in my kitchen for a long time after that phone call, staring at my phone and wondering if I just destroyed my entire future. This internship was everything to me. My ticket to a career I dreamed of since I was a kid, my chance to work on research that could change the world, my opportunity to prove that I belonged in this field. But as I sat there, still feeling the effects of 7 hours in that hellish greenhouse, I realized something important. No job, no matter how prestigious or important, was worth risking my life. And no supervisor, no matter how powerful, had the right to demand that I put myself in genuine danger. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about Marcus, wondering what he would think when he found out what had happened. Would he understand? Would he support my decision? Or would he see it as a betrayal of the trust he'd placed in me? I also couldn't stop thinking about that photo I'd taken of the thermometer. It was sitting in my phone's photo gallery, like a piece of evidence in a trial I wasn't sure I wanted to have. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized it might be the only thing standing between me and a suspension that could ruin my reputation in the industry. The next morning, I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of waiting to see what disciplinary action Wilhelmina would take, I was going to take control of the situation myself. I was going to contact HR and tell my side of the story before she could spin the narrative against me. I spent an hour crafting an email to the Human Resources Department, carefully documenting everything that had happened. I described the equipment failure, the extreme temperatures, the safety risks, and my attempts to continue working despite the dangerous conditions. I attached the photo of the thermometer showing 134 degrees, and I referenced the specific clause in my employment contract that prohibited working in environments exceeding 115 degrees. But most importantly, I owned up to my mistake. I acknowledged that I should have contacted someone before leaving the facility, even if that someone was Wilhelmina herself. I explained that I was dealing with early symptoms of heat exhaustion and wasn't thinking clearly, but that I took full responsibility for failing to follow proper protocol. I hit send before I could second-guess myself, then sat back and waited for the consequences. I didn't have to wait long. At 10:30 a.m., my phone rang with a call from HR. Felix, this is Delphine Riverside from Human Resources. I received your email, and I need you to come in for a meeting this afternoon. Can you be here at 2 p.m.? Of course, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Am I in trouble? We'll discuss everything when you get here. Just bring any documentation you have related to yesterday's incident. The drive to the main office felt like the longest 30 minutes of my life. I kept rehearsing what I would say, how I would explain my actions, how I would try to save my internship and my reputation. But deep down, I was preparing for the worst. Delphine Riverside was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a professional demeanor that immediately put me at ease. She invited me into a conference room and offered me coffee, which I gratefully accepted despite my nervous stomach. Felix, she began, opening a folder on the table between us. I want you to know that we take safety concerns very seriously here at Pinnacle Agricultural Sciences. Your email raised some important questions about yesterday's incident, and we need to get to the bottom of what happened. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. First, let me see that photograph you mentioned. I pulled out my phone and showed her the image of the thermometer reading 134 degrees. She studied it carefully, then asked me to email it to her official address. This is very concerning, she said, making notes in the folder. You're absolutely correct that our employment contracts prohibit work in environments exceeding 115 degrees. This reading is nearly 20 degrees beyond our safety threshold. I tried to continue working, I said, the words tumbling out. I really did try to push through it, because I didn't want to let anyone down. But I was getting dizzy and nauseous, and I was scared I might collapse. Delphine nodded sympathetically. Heat exhaustion is no joke, Felix. You could have been seriously injured or worse. Now I need to ask you about your conversation with Wilhelmina Blackthorne. She filed a complaint alleging that you were insubordinate and unprofessional. My heart sank. Of course she had. Can you tell me exactly what was said during that phone call? I took a deep breath and recounted the entire conversation as accurately as I could remember. I didn't try to sugarcoat my responses or make myself sound more professional than I had been. I told her about Wilhelmina's threats, her dismissive attitude toward the safety concerns, and yes, my own angry response about inviting her to work in those conditions herself. I shouldn't have said that, I admitted. I was frustrated and scared about being suspended, but that doesn't excuse being disrespectful. Delphine made more notes, then looked up at me with an expression I couldn't read. Felix, I need to be honest with you. From a technical standpoint, leaving your post without notifying your supervisor does constitute job abandonment, which is a serious offense. However, the circumstances you've described raise significant questions about whether proper safety protocols were being followed. She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. I'm going to need to investigate this further before making any decisions about disciplinary action. In the meantime, I'm suspending your normal duties pending the outcome of this investigation. My heart dropped into my stomach. Am I being fired? No, Felix. You're being temporarily reassigned while we sort this out. I'm placing you under the supervision of Harrison Goldfield, who manages our research documentation department. You'll be helping with data entry and analysis until Marcus returns from vacation, and we can resolve this situation. It wasn't what I'd hoped for, but it wasn't the disaster I'd feared either. At least I still had a job. There's one more thing, Delphine said as she gathered her papers. I'm going to need to speak with Wilhelmina about her handling of this situation. The safety protocols exist for a reason, and all supervisors are required to prioritize employee well-being over productivity targets. I left that meeting feeling cautiously optimistic. I hadn't been fired, and it seemed like HR was taking my safety concerns seriously. But I still had no idea how this would all play out or what it would mean for my future at the company. Harrison Goldfield turned out to be a godsend. He was a soft-spoken man in his early 30s who had started as an intern himself 5 years earlier and worked his way up to managing the company's research database. When Delphine introduced us, he immediately put me at ease. "Don't worry about all the drama," he said, with a reassuring smile. "Your job right now is to focus on learning and contributing where you can. We'll let HR sort out the politics." For the next week, I worked closely with Harrison, learning how the company's research data was organized, analyzed, and reported to their government clients. It was different from the hands-on greenhouse work I'd been doing with Marcus, but it gave me valuable insight into the bigger picture of what the company did. "You know," Harrison said one afternoon as we were reviewing crop yield data, "this investigation has people talking. Word is getting around that someone finally stood up to Wilhelmina's management style." I looked up from my computer screen. "What do you mean?" "Let's just say you're not the first person to have problems with her approach to supervision. She has a reputation for being demanding, especially with younger employees." Before I could ask for more details, my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Just heard what happened. Don't worry. We'll talk when I get back. You did the right thing." That simple message meant more to me than I could express. Whatever happened next, at least I knew Marcus understood. The following Monday, exactly 2 weeks after the greenhouse incident, I got another call from HR. "Felix, can you come in for a meeting at 3 p.m. today? Marcus will be joining us. He returned from vacation this morning." Walking into that conference room and seeing Marcus's familiar face was like getting a hug from a favorite uncle. He stood up immediately and shook my hand. "How are you holding up?" he asked, his voice full of genuine concern. "I've been better," I admitted. "I'm sorry this happened while you were away." "Don't apologize," he said firmly. "From what I've heard, you handled a dangerous situation exactly as you should have." Delphine entered the room carrying a thick folder, followed by a man I didn't recognize. Tall, silver-haired, and wearing an expensive suit. "Felix, I'd like you to meet Theodore Ashworth, our regional director. He's been overseeing the investigation into last week's incident." Theodore shook my hand with a firm grip and a serious expression. "Mr. Blackwood, I want to start by apologizing on behalf of Pinnacle Agricultural Sciences. The situation you encountered should never have been allowed to occur." I felt a wave of relief wash over me. "Our investigation," Delphine continued, "revealed several serious protocol violations in how your safety concerns were handled. The equipment failure in Greenhouse 6 should have triggered an immediate shutdown of operations in that facility until repairs could be completed. Instead, you were expected to continue working in conditions that posed a genuine risk to your health and safety. Theodore nodded gravely. Furthermore, when you reported these concerns to your temporary supervisor, the appropriate response should have been to ensure your immediate safety and arrange for emergency repairs, not to threaten disciplinary action for prioritizing your well-being. What does this mean for my internship? I asked, hardly daring to hope. Marcus leaned forward. It means you're back under my supervision, and we've arranged for additional support staff to ensure you're never managing 6 greenhouse facilities alone again. It also means that the formal complaint filed against you has been withdrawn and removed from your employment record. And Wilhelmina? I couldn't help asking. Theodore's expression darkened. Miss Blackthorne is no longer in a supervisory role with this company. Her handling of this situation violated multiple company policies regarding employee safety and professional conduct. I sat back in my chair, hardly able to process what I was hearing. Not only was I not being punished, but the person who had threatened to destroy my career was the one facing consequences. Felix, Delphine said, I want you to understand that while we don't approve of employees leaving their posts without notification, we recognize that you were dealing with a genuine emergency situation. In the future, if you ever feel unsafe in your work environment, your first priority should be your own safety. Contact your supervisor, contact HR, contact whoever you need to contact, but don't risk your health trying to maintain productivity. We've also implemented new safety protocols, Marcus added. All greenhouse facilities now have backup cooling systems, and we've established a direct hotline for reporting equipment failures that pose safety risks. Theodore stood up and extended his hand again. Mr. Blackwood, I hope this experience hasn't soured you on working with our company. Based on your supervisor's reports and your handling of this difficult situation, we'd very much like you to consider joining us permanently after graduation. I shook his hand, feeling like I was in a dream. Thank you, sir. I'd be honored. As we left the conference room, Marcus put his hand on my shoulder. You know, Felix, what you did took real courage. A lot of people would have just suffered in silence and hoped for the best. By standing up for yourself, you not only protected your own safety, but potentially prevented other employees from facing the same dangerous situation. I was terrified I'd ruined everything, I admitted. The only thing you would have ruined is your health if you'd stayed in that greenhouse. Always remember, no job is worth risking your life, no matter how important it seems. That evening, I called my parents to tell them what had happened. My mother cried when I described the temperatures I'd been working in, and my father was furious that anyone had expected me to continue under those conditions. I'm proud of you, my dad said. It takes guts to stand up to authority figures, especially when your future is on the line. But you did the right thing, and it sounds like the company recognized that. Looking back now, 6 months later, I realize that day in the greenhouse changed me in ways I'm still discovering. I learned that advocating for yourself isn't selfish. It's necessary. I learned that good employers will support you when you prioritize safety over productivity. And I learned that sometimes the scariest conversations lead to the most important changes. My internship continued successfully, and I was offered a full-time position starting after graduation. Marcus became not just a supervisor, but a mentor, teaching me not just about agricultural science, but about professional integrity and standing up for what's right. Wilhelmina Blackthorne left the company quietly, with no fanfare or explanation given to the general staff. I heard through the office grapevine that she'd been struggling with similar complaints from other employees, and my situation was simply the final straw that broke her authority. The new safety protocols implemented after my incident have already prevented 2 similar situations. Equipment failures that could have put employees at risk were quickly identified and addressed before anyone was endangered. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I'd just kept my mouth shut, if I'd continued working in that 134-degree greenhouse until I collapsed from heat stroke. Would Wilhelmina have taken responsibility then? Would the company have implemented safety changes only after someone was seriously injured? I'll never know for sure, but I'm glad I didn't find out the hard way. The experience taught me that your employer's respect isn't something you earn by silently enduring dangerous or unreasonable conditions. You earn it by demonstrating good judgment, professional integrity, and the courage to speak up when something isn't right. Today, when new interns start at Pinnacle Agricultural Sciences, part of their orientation includes my story, not as a cautionary tale about insubordination, but as an example of how to advocate for workplace safety. It's been turned into a case study about the importance of proper communication channels and the responsibility of supervisors to prioritize employee well-being. I still have that photo on my phone, the thermometer reading 134 degrees in that hellish greenhouse. Sometimes I look at it and remember how scared I was, how certain I was that I destroyed my future by refusing to continue working in those conditions. But now when I see that image, I feel something different. Pride. Not pride in defying authority, but pride in having the courage to protect myself when no one else would. Pride in standing up for safety standards that protect not just me, but every employee who works in those facilities. If I could go back and do it again, would I handle things differently? Maybe I would have called Wilhelmina before leaving the facility, or tried to reach the maintenance department one more time. But I wouldn't change the fundamental decision to prioritize my safety over blind obedience to authority. Because at the end of the day, the most important lesson I learned wasn't about greenhouse management or agricultural research. It was about self-respect and the understanding that you teach people how to treat you by what you're willing to accept. I'm Felix Blackwood. I'm 19 years old now, and I'm no longer afraid to speak up when something isn't right. That 134-degree greenhouse tried to break me, but instead, it forged me into someone stronger, someone who knows that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what's right even when you're terrified of the consequences. And sometimes, just sometimes, doing what's right doesn't just protect you, it changes everything for the better.